How a culture morally decays is our subject matter today. How a culture morally decays. Detectives Barney and Andy were assigned to investigate a potential murder case. As Barney approached the scene, he quickly stormed into the room at the apartment complex and scanned over the evidence. Nothing seemed too obvious to him about who committed the crime except for a body that was sitting in a chair. He scanned again, and nothing stuck out. In a moment of frustration, he said, "There's just no way to know who committed this crime, if anyone. The evidence is just not there. This appears to be a classic case of suicide. The only way we'll be able to know who committed this crime is if the killer comes to us himself and confesses to doing it and how it was done." Andy, however, arrived around the same time. But Andy was a bit more methodical in his approach. Andy noticed a dent in the car in the parking lot and skid marks and an oil stain beside the car. And he thought, I wonder if this was a quick getaway. Andy noticed a handrail that was torn down that was on the stairs, and he asked the apartment manager how that happened, and the manager said, "Well, I'm not quite sure, but I know when it happened, sometime last night because it wasn't down yesterday." Andy continued toward the room, and he noticed a handprint on the window of the room that was facing the breezeway. "Perhaps we can scan that print and see if we can identify it," Andy thought to himself. About that time, a neighbor came out of the room, and Andy approached the neighbor for an interview and asked a few questions and learned that she had some vital information. She heard some commotion about 1:15 in the morning, and it actually woke her up. But apparently this was pretty common for her neighbors. "There's always a brawl here, it seems," she said. Andy asked further questions about the neighbor's relationship, work life, family, etc. Andy tried to find out all the neighbor knew about those living next to her. And a piece of critical information that the neighbors shared was that the gentleman who lived there was a mechanic named Ernest. And she heard him leave the apartment abruptly last night. And after slamming the door, she heard a thud and then squealing tires as he left the parking lot. This seemed to corroborate what Andy had noticed. When Andy finally reached the room, on the door handle was a smudge of oil. It appeared to be grease or oil. Andy carefully opened the door to examine the room, and everything looked rather ordinary at first glance. However, the body was positioned in the chair in an unnatural way, as if it was placed there. On the floor next to the body, there was one small drop of blood, along with a drop of oil. On the desk lay a phone, and Andy thought, good, we can find out a lot of information about the phone. The phone is a person's life, so we can learn about their social media, we can learn about their text conversations, phone calls, previous locations, etc. Andy looked through the rest of the house and found some car parts and tools, which seemed to corroborate the witness testimony about the gentleman being a mechanic. And then he looked and noticed a cabinet was open in the kitchen. And when he opened the cabinet, there was an empty pill bottle. But the expiration date was just a few weeks away. He found that to be a little curious. And then as he looked further, there was an empty bottle of liquor in the trash can. This could be suicide, Andy thought. Pondering all the evidence, Andy started for the door. Then he noticed another vital piece of information. The letter that was on the counter. It was a love letter addressed to the victim from a gentleman named Otis. And at the top of the letter lay a drop of grease. Andy took one more look at the body, and he noticed that a cup was also on the desk next to her. He didn't see it earlier, but it was a mostly empty, large foam cup with a hint of alcohol still in it. And on the side of the cup was a finger smudge of car grease. Andy walked down to the parking lot and met with Barney. And Barney said to Andy, "See, there's just no evidence of a murder. It must be suicide." Andy looked at Barney with a confused yet patient look and said, "Barney, I think you may have missed a few things. Come with me and I'll show you. I'll show you a new way to look at the scene." Barney's eyes were then opened. He was shocked about all that he had missed from the scene. He could see how there was just so much evidence to now consider. Was this really suicide or was it murder? After months of investigation, they arrested Ernest for murder. Because the evidence was stacked against him, he had poisoned the woman. From that point on, Barney never looked at a crime scene the same way. He was forever indebted to the relationship and the teaching of his partner, Andy. Regarding this story, I have two questions for us to ponder today. Number one, if you are not a Christian, my question is this: which detective describes you in investigating the existence of God or whether Christianity is true? Which detective best describes you in investigating the existence of God or whether Christianity is true? Are you like Barney, who glazes over the evidence? Are you like Barney, who jumps to conclusions after looking at just glossing the evidence? Or are you more like Andy? Are you familiar with the evidence and come to rational conclusions? Or maybe you've even looked at the evidence and then found the evidence to be unsatisfactory in proving that God exists or that Christianity is true. You see, if there is no God, then it does not matter if you believe in Him. Because if there really is no God, the believer and unbeliever will have the same fate. That make sense? You tracking? A couple of you? It's always baffled me why many atheists are those who do not believe in God, they get so angry with Christians trying to evangelize and proselytize. But why do they care? Because if they truly believe there is no God, then does it matter whether they believe in God or not? Does it matter whether you worship God or not? It does not. Because you have the same fate if you truly believe there is no God, or if God does not actually exist. However, consider the opposite. What if there really is a God? Or more specifically, what if the Christian God is the true God? Then it certainly matters what you believe about Him, because that will also determine where you will spend the afterlife. It's a sign of love on the part of the true Christian to tell people about God, to tell people about sin and salvation in Christ, because we believe that the fate of a person, of those without Christ, will live eternally in hell. One atheist comedian from the comedian group Penn and Teller, I don't remember which one said this, but he recognized when talking to a Christian, I'm going to paraphrase, he says, if you truly believed that a person will go to hell without knowing your God, how much do you have to hate a person to not tell them about your God? This is coming from the mouth of an atheist. Did you hear what he said? Bye, y'all.
Sorry.
It's okay. If you truly believed that a person will go to hell without knowing your God, how much do you have to hate someone to not tell them about your God? Coming from the mouth of an atheist. That's my first question to consider. Because many people in this world are very much like Barney. They look at the evidence and say, there's no evidence. The only way we can know if God's true is if He appears before me and tells me what He did and how He did it. But that's not often how God works. He has planted pieces of evidence. And for those that are truly seeking Him, Jeremiah 29:13, what does it say? You will seek the Lord and you will find him when, here's the qualification, you seek him with all of your heart. He is there to be found. My second question, which is primary what we're going to talk about the rest of this sermon, is what happens to a culture when the people continue to gloss over the evidence for God or the truthfulness of Christianity? What happens to a culture when the majority of the people of the culture abandon the pursuit of God? And why would they do so? I've had several conversations with people recently, and we've discussed how bad things have gotten in America. Has anybody ever had a conversation recently about that? Yeah, I'm sure all of us have. But how did it get this way? Have you considered that? How did it get this way? How did we come completely swaying the opposite direction from where we were founded? Well, I think Romans chapter 1 helps us answer that. I'm going to reference chapter 1, verses 18 through 32, but we're only going to read. I'll have you stand as we read verses 18 through 20. So if you would stand with me as we read Scripture today. Verse 18 says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." Father, as we come before you and hear from your word today, help us to examine it and examine our hearts and know what we need to do in response to this. You use me as your vessel and your tool this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. I want you to notice in verse 18 through 20 the foundation of a godless culture. The foundation of a godless culture. Number one, God's wrath is being poured out against the wickedness. God's wrath is being poured out against the wickedness of the culture. Why is that happening? Sometimes God's wrath is not necessarily God enacting punishment, but it could be God removing his hand of blessing from the culture. In other words, he is holding the culture back from being as evil as they could possibly be, and he says, okay, have it your way, and the floodgates have now released, and people are actually getting the consequences, getting what the results are of their actions. That's God's wrath being poured out against the wickedness of the people. God simply gives us a Burger King, all right? Have it your way. Number two, wickedness has come as people suppress the truth. So number one, God's wrath is being poured out against wickedness. Well, how'd the wickedness get here? Because people have suppressed the truth. People have suppressed the truth. Number three, the people suppress the truth because of their wickedness. That sounds like circular reasoning. But let me tell you this. It's not necessarily a circular reasoning, but it is cyclical. You know, it's like people are stuck on a carousel. They're reaping the fruits of their labor. They're wicked. They abandon the truth. They continue to abandon the truth and get more wicked. Then because of their wickedness, they abandon the truth. And because they abandon the truth, they get more wicked. And it is a cyclical thing. And that's that culture that we're stuck in right now. Would you agree? We're all a part of this, though, hope you realize. Because in Romans chapter 3 and Romans chapter 5, sin has come into the world death has come into the world because of sin. Why? Because we're all sinners. We all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We cannot be perfect. And because of that, that's what brought this wickedness that we pursue and that we abandon the truth. But what is the truth that we have abandoned? What is it that we have abandoned? The truth is knowledge of God, as seen in these verses today. Of course, Jesus says, I am the truth in John 14:6. But in these verses, Paul points that people have abandoned the basic truth of God because God has made himself known through his creation, and people have abandoned that. People have abandoned this pursuit of God, this acknowledgement of God. He has made himself known through what he has made, but people refuse to see it. They put the blinders on. Why do they put the blinders on? Because they're wicked. That leads us to number 5 here. No one has an excuse to not acknowledge God because he has made himself known through creation. He has made himself known through creation. His eternal power and divine nature are seen through his creation. Psalm 19, I'm going to read verse 1 and 2. The heavens declare, or verses 1 through 4, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them, but their voice goes out to all the world, their words to the ends of the earth. God's creation speaks and reveals his glory, reveals his power. And people have decayed so much that they do not even recognize the basic qualities of God seen through his creation. They can see it, but they prefer to indulge in their own sin instead of respond to it. The evidence is there for God, but they refuse to see it because to see it, that would force them to have to respond to it. And they don't want to respond to the truth. Are we tracking? Verses 18 through 20 give us the basic foundation of a godless culture. But what about the fallout? What about the fallout? What happens when a culture continues down this road of abandoning the truth? Well, in short, it's this. The fallout of a godless culture is a progressive hardening. You could also use the word callousness, a progressive callousness. There's your hard word today. Verses 21 through 23, look at this. It'll be up on the screen for you, but you can look in your own Bible. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, there's a note for our culture today. Although they claim to be wise, we have science on our side, right? That's what they say. We claim to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings, birds, and reptiles, and animals. Have you ever shaken the hand of a brick mason or a carpenter, mechanic, or roofer? You may have noticed when you shake their hand, it's like you're shaking a block, right? It's so rough, it's hard because of the calluses on there. The calluses are built, the body builds these calluses to help prevent injuries. And it's a way to protect against constant beatings of wear and tear. And the calluses are not there to produce blisters and all kinds of other problems. The hands, in other words, become more resilient and resistant to the stimulus of hard labor. In a similar way, people's hearts do this toward God. God, in his loving kindness, has revealed himself, but because people prefer their own wickedness over worshiping him, they develop calluses on their hands or on their hearts. Calluses toward God. And their hearts become hard and resilient and resistant to the stimulus of God's rescued labor for them. What's the fallout of a hardened heart? What's the fallout of a hardened heart? I'm going to give you three things as we close up. The fallout of a hardened heart is, number one, God gives them over morally. This is seen verse 24 and 25. God gives them over morally. Therefore, God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. Man, as we read the next following verses all the way to the end of the chapter, it is pegging to the T what our culture is. Gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Natasha Crane, in her book, Faithfully Different, I believe nailed our culture on the head. And she said this about our culture, as she describes it: feelings are the ultimate guide for our culture. Happiness is the ultimate goal for our culture. Judging is the ultimate sin in our culture. And God is the ultimate guess, because they don't know who God is. He is unknowable. And when you strip away the foundation of God and you replace it with a foundation of feelings, you finish with moral fluidity. Hope you understand what I'm saying. When you strip away the foundation of God and you say, okay, now instead of God, our standard of truth, we're going to base our truth on how we feel. Then all of a sudden, you have this shifting moral compass that has no ground. It's like one author describes it as feet that are firmly planted in midair. That has no ground to support them. The hard-hearted people, notice though, do not stop worshiping. They just exchanged the object of worship. Did you notice that, what Paul says? They've traded the truth about God for a lie, and they worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. We were designed for worship. In fact, I even use that as an argument for the existence of God. The reason why there are so many religions in this world is because we were designed for worship. But because people have sinned and suppressed the truth, they don't eliminate worship, they just exchange the object of worship. In our culture, what we have exchanged it for is money. We're worshiping money, we worship sex, we worship power, we worship sports, and food, and comfort, and luxury, and entertainment. And ultimately, I think the greatest god of our culture is ourselves. The God of self. Not only has God given them over morally, He's given them over mortally. Number 2, in verses 26 through 27, he says, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Mortally gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty of their error. There's no other simple way to put this. This is about practicing homosexuality, which is running rampant and prevalent in our culture. It is now celebrated as the right thing to do. It is a rebellion against the basic, very, very basic natural order of things that God has instituted. And we have found a way to excuse it and to replace it. We have found a way to eliminate it and exchange it. We try to exchange anything that has to do with God. And that's what a godless culture will do. Number 3, God gives them over mentally. Verse 28 through the end of the chapter. If this doesn't describe our culture, I don't know what does. Listen to this. God gives them over mentally. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain knowledge of God, that's true. If you look through the American lens, People are abandoning the truth about knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind, so that they do what they ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, of evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. I found that to be quite ironic. In the list of all of these atrocious sins you need to have, and they disobeyed their parents. I just showed you how culturally different things are from then to now. Disobeying your parents then was a huge disrespect, was a huge abomination, and brought down many curses on you. Now, it's a regular thing. It's a hobby to disobey our parents now. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Although they know God, they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they do not continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them. Nailed it, Paul. You nailed it. Have you ever wondered why or how America has become so corrupt? It's because of the hard-heartedness of people and their resilience against the truth, resilience against their maker. But here's the message, here's the challenge for believers today. It's time to engage the culture. We can't just keep sitting back. Listen, I feel a little bit embarrassed and responsible that the decay of our culture has happened in my lifetime. I feel a little bit responsible for that. And for those that are older than me, I hope you do too. It's happened under your watch. We have to do something. I wonder if Christians in the Christian church have gotten so comfortable living under the umbrella of religious liberty, freedom of speech, modern luxury, and this has made us lazy and entitled. Yes, these benefits are great, but they've conditioned us. They've created unrealistic expectations of how life is supposed to be. Listen, Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble. We go through a little bit of trouble as the American church, and we're all in disarray. Instead of focusing on the things that God wants us to focus on and keeping the main things, we're getting troubled about what color the carpet is. Not that our church does that. I hope we haven't had to change the carpet yet. Or what color the walls are. I don't care if they're neon green. If that's what brings people in, that's what we need to do. Times have changed, and we have to change and shift. We have to adjust ourselves. We have to be prepared to engage the culture. And even in the last 5 years, things have changed dramatically. And we need to wake up from our slumber and recognize that. We have to adapt. We have to engage the culture. And one of the ways we can do that, and I think one of the primary ways we can do that, is to be like Andy. What do you mean by that? We take the time to show people the truth. We invest in relationships. We say to our friends, come with me, and I'll show you a new way to look at things. It's called relational evangelism. That's how we're going to win people, one by one. And we allow God to use those relationships to impact people's lives. You want to change the culture? Praise God. One life at a time. You may not be able to singularly change the culture, but if you can change one life or allow God to use you to change one life, you be faithful to doing just that. Amen. You have received a little blank sheet in your bulletin. There's a reason why that was put there. It wasn't an accident. Here's what I want you to do. On that blank sheet of paper, I want you to write one person. Who is your one? That's our last question for today. Can you put that slide up, Jesse? Who is your one person? And this is one person that you don't know if they're saved or lost. It could be someone that you know is lost. But it's someone that God has maybe placed on your heart that you can directly pray for, that you can have an opportunity to invite them to church or to share with them faith in Christ. I've had one pastor say it like this: someone who is close to you but far from God. Somebody close to you but far from God. If you were here a few years ago, we did a Project Andrew on a Wednesday night. This is the same kind of thing, your Project Andrew. And it could be the same person you've been praying for since then, or maybe there's somebody new now. But here's what I want you to do. Write that person's name on that list or on that piece of paper. And what I'd like for us to do is have a moment of time to pray specifically over those people. And if you're willing, I would like you to come and place those papers on the altar here. And I would like to collect those papers after we're finished today, and I'm going to put them on a list. And we're going to be particular in prayer over these people. So you pray, and we'll have a moment of silence while we listen to the Lord and see if there's anybody on our hearts that we need to pray for, anybody that's close to you but far from the Lord. You ask the Lord to reveal to you who that person is, and you're going to be praying for them and being intentional about building a relationship with that person so that you can eventually invite them to church or share the gospel message with them. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much. Thank you for your love and grace, God. And Father, I pray that whoever is on these little pieces of paper, God, that you would work in them, around their lives, whatever you need to do to make them more receptive to the gospel. And also pray for us as your church to be bold in our witness, to be compassionate and understanding, to be willing to be rejected, but knowing that they are not rejecting us, they are rejecting you. But we are just your messengers. And Father, help us to be vigilant and be bold and to love you by loving others. Reveal to us who needs to be on this list. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.